For millions of people, Shirley Bassey will always appear beneath a golden light. The orchestra rises, the brass grows louder. Then she steps forward in a glittering gown, lifts one arm, and releases a voice so powerful that the microphone almost seems unnecessary. She does not simply sing Goldfinger, she commands it. Every word carries danger, glamour, and confidence. When the final note arrives, Shirley holds it until the room belongs entirely to her. That is the woman many fans still picture. Young, dramatic, almost impossibly elegant. But more than 60 years have passed since Goldfinger first reached cinemas in 1964. Shirley Bassey is now 89 years old, and her life looks very different from the world of diamonds, television specials, and crowded concert halls. She appears in public only occasionally. The famous gowns remain carefully preserved in photographs and film archives, while Shirley spends much of her time away from the stage, close to her family, and protected from the noise that followed her for most of her life. Then, in the spring of 2026, she shared an unusually personal message. Shirley explained that she needed surgery on her hand. The pain and physical difficulty had reached a point where she could no longer continue one of the private rituals she had maintained for decades, answering letters from her admirers. She asked fans not to send records, photographs, or personal items expecting them to be signed and returned. It was a small announcement compared with the grand events of her career, but it revealed something quietly moving. After more than 70 years in entertainment, she had still been reading those letters herself. Weeks later, a new photograph appeared. Shirley was sitting in a restaurant in Spain, with one hand still wrapped after the operation. Her hair was short and silver. She wore dark glasses and smiled beside a chair carrying her name. There was no orchestra behind her and no spotlight falling across a sequined dress. Just an elderly woman enjoying an afternoon before visiting her son and his family. She told her followers that the recovery was progressing slowly. Writing remained difficult, and she was learning to eat with her left hand. With the dry humor her fans recognized, she joked that it was helping with her diet. It was unmistakably Shirley. Older, naturally. More fragile in ways the public had rarely been allowed to see. Yet, there was still something familiar in the raised chin and broad smile. The confidence had not disappeared. It had simply become quieter. Her present appearance may surprise viewers who remember only the woman on the album covers. During the height of her fame, Shirley seemed built for spectacle. She wore feathers, diamonds, capes, and dresses that caught every available light. She stretched her arms across enormous stages as though the theater were too small to contain her. Even beside the most celebrated actors and musicians of her generation, she remained difficult to ignore. She was also the only performer to record the official themes for 3 James Bond films: Goldfinger, Diamonds Are Forever, and Moonraker. That association made her voice part of cinema history and gave her an image that lasted long after popular music had changed around her. Yet the glamour concealed a beginning that was anything but glamorous. Long before the diamonds, before the royal performances, and before anyone called her Dame Shirley Bassey, she was a girl from Cardiff who left school at 14 and went to work in a factory. She came home with the smell of industry on her clothes, then spent her evenings singing wherever someone would allow her near a microphone. The distance between that girl and the woman in the golden dress was enormous, and it began in Tiger Bay. Long before Shirley Bassey entered a theater in a glittering gown, she knew the sound of Cardiff waking for work. She was born Shirley Veronica Bassey on January 8, 1937, in Tiger Bay, the busy dockland district where sailors, laborers, and families from many backgrounds lived close together. Her father, Henry Bassey, was a Nigerian seaman. Her mother, Eliza, came from Yorkshire. Shirley was the youngest child in a large household, and she grew up nearby in Splot, a working-class part of Cardiff where money was often scarce and privacy was difficult to find. The streets around her did not resemble the polished world she would later inhabit. There were rows of modest houses, factory buildings, railway lines, and the constant activity of the docks. Clothes were repaired instead of replaced. Children learned early that every wage mattered. Shirley also grew up as a mixed-race girl in Britain during the 1940s and early 1950s. Her appearance made her noticeable before her voice ever did. The exact details of every insult or hardship were not recorded, but racial prejudice was part of the environment in which she came of age. She would eventually become one of the first Black British entertainers to achieve worldwide fame, although that future would have seemed almost impossible from the streets of Splot. Her voice, however, was already impossible to hide. At school, Shirley sang with so much force that teachers reportedly asked her to hold back. She later recalled being told to quieten down, even while performing in the school choir. At one point, she said, she was made to sing from the corridor because her voice overwhelmed the other children. There was no formal plan behind it, no expensive lessons, no carefully arranged path into show business. She simply knew that singing changed the room. At 14, Shirley left school and began working at Curran Steel's, a factory in Cardiff. During the day, she handled the ordinary routine of industrial work. In the evenings and on weekends, she sang in local pubs and clubs, earning extra money wherever she could. The woman later associated with diamonds and champagne was still returning home from factory shifts, changing her clothes and searching for another small stage. Those early rooms were important. They taught her how to be heard over conversation, glasses and cigarette smoke. A hesitant singer could disappear in such places. Shirley learned to lift her head, open her mouth, and make people stop talking. By 1953, when she was 16, she secured her first professional contract with a touring production called Memories of Jolson. She later appeared in another revue, Hot from Harlem. The work was not glamorous, and the pay could be modest, but she was finally traveling as a performer rather than standing on a factory floor. Her progress was interrupted by an enormous personal responsibility. In 1954, still a teenager, Shirley gave birth to her daughter Sharon. For a young unmarried mother in that period, the judgment could be severe. Her career might easily have ended before most of Britain had ever heard her name. But she returned. While performing in Jersey, she met manager Mike Sullivan. Then, in 1955, impresario Jack Hilton saw her at London's Astor Club and placed her in the West End revue Such Is Life. The show opened at the Adelphi Theatre, where Shirley performed Burn My Candle, a suggestive song that reportedly provoked both disapproval and enthusiastic applause. A television appearance from the production caught the attention of record producer Johnny Franz, who offered her a recording contract. The factory girl from Cardiff had reached the West End. She had not yet found the song that would make her famous. There was no Bond film, no golden dress, and no international audience waiting. But the voice was already there, and now the right people had finally heard it. By the end of the 1950s, Shirley Bassey was no longer simply a promising singer from Cardiff. She had become one of Britain's brightest new stars. Her first major breakthrough arrived with As I Love You, which reached #1 in the United Kingdom in 1959. More hit records quickly followed. Reach for the Stars, Climb Every Mountain, As Long as He Needs Me. Every performance seemed larger than the last. Audiences weren't just listening to Shirley Bassey anymore. They were waiting for her. There was something unusual about the way she occupied a stage. Most singers stood behind the microphone. Shirley seemed to attack it. She threw her arms into the air, stretched every lyric to its emotional limit, and sang with a power that left audiences wondering how such a voice could come from someone barely over 5 feet tall. Her dramatic style divided critics at times, but audiences rarely cared. They came for exactly that intensity. Then, in 1964, everything changed. Film composer John Barry was searching for the perfect voice to introduce a new James Bond adventure called Goldfinger. The song needed elegance, danger, seduction, and strength at the same time. Shirley possessed all four. The recording session at Abbey Road quickly became part of music history. The final note of Goldfinger was extraordinarily demanding. Barry kept asking her to hold it longer. Shirley later joked that she eventually removed her bra because it was restricting her breathing. Session guitarist Jimmy Page, years before Led Zeppelin, remembered watching her complete the take, only to collapse on the studio floor after holding that famous final note. It wasn't theatrical exaggeration. She had simply given everything she had. The result was unforgettable. When audiences heard that opening brass section followed by Shirley's voice, they immediately knew they were entering James Bond's world. Goldfinger. It became far more than a movie song. In the United States, it climbed into the top 10 and introduced Shirley Bassey to millions of listeners who had never heard her before. More importantly, it transformed her into a permanent part of cinema history. Even today, many Bond fans still consider it one of the greatest theme songs the franchise has ever produced. Success arrived almost overnight. Carnegie Hall, Royal Variety performances, television specials, international tours, luxury hotels, sold-out concert halls. Her wardrobe became nearly as famous as her voice. Floor-length gowns covered in sequins, dramatic capes, diamonds that sparkled beneath stage lights. She understood that audiences were not buying only songs. They were buying an experience, and Shirley delivered one every single night. Yet something interesting happened after Goldfinger. Popular music was changing. The Beatles had transformed the industry. Rock bands were replacing orchestras. Younger audiences wanted guitars instead of grand ballads. Many singers from Shirley's generation struggled to adapt. She didn't chase every trend. Instead, she leaned into what made her different. Songs like Big Spender and later Diamonds Are Forever showcased exactly what audiences expected from Shirley Bassey: confidence, elegance, and a voice powerful enough to dominate an orchestra rather than compete with electric guitars. Her connection with James Bond also continued. After Goldfinger, she returned to record Diamonds Are Forever in 1971 and later Moonraker in 1979, making her the only artist to perform the official theme songs for 3 Bond films. That achievement remains unique. By then, Shirley Bassey had become something larger than a recording artist. She represented glamour itself. People expected perfection every time she walked onto a stage. Few realized how exhausting that expectation could become, because while audiences saw glittering gowns and standing ovations, Shirley's private life was becoming far more complicated than the public could imagine. The applause never stopped, but once the curtain came down, another story was waiting. For people sitting in the front row, Shirley Bassey always looked fearless. She walked onto the stage with absolute confidence, wrapped in sequins and surrounded by applause. Every performance suggested complete control. Every note sounded effortless. But once the curtain came down, the life waiting behind it was far more complicated than anyone imagined. Long before international fame, Shirley had already become a mother. In 1954, when she was only 17, she gave birth to her first daughter, Sharon. Because of the social attitudes of the time, Sharon was initially raised by Shirley's older sister, and for several years, many people believed they were sisters rather than mother and daughter. It was a painful arrangement, shaped by the realities of Britain in the 1950s rather than by a lack of love. As Shirley's career accelerated, her private life attracted almost as much attention as her performances. She married film producer Kenneth Hume in 1961. The marriage was turbulent from the beginning and ended in a highly publicized divorce only a few years later. Newspapers focused on accusations, rumors, and personal details that Shirley would have preferred to keep private. It was one of the first times she experienced how fame could turn personal heartbreak into public entertainment. Later, she married Italian producer Sergio Novak. Together they adopted a son, Mark, and for a period, it seemed life might finally become more stable. She continued touring internationally, while trying to balance motherhood with one of the busiest performance schedules in entertainment. Then came the moment that changed everything. In September 1985, Shirley's younger daughter, Samantha, was found dead in the River Avon in Bristol. She was only 21 years old. The official conclusion at the time was accidental drowning. Shirley never completely accepted that explanation. Years later, after new claims surfaced, police reopened the investigation. Detectives examined the case again, hoping modern inquiries might finally provide a different answer. But after months of investigation, they concluded there was no evidence that another person had been responsible for Samantha's death. Officially, the case remained unchanged. For Shirley, however, official conclusions did not erase a mother's grief. She rarely discussed Samantha in public. When she did, her words were measured and deeply personal. She admitted that losing her daughter was something from which she never truly recovered. Friends later described that period as one of the darkest chapters of her life. The emotional shock affected more than her family. It affected the instrument that had defined her entire existence. For a time after Samantha's death, Shirley temporarily lost her singing voice. Doctors could find no dramatic physical injury. Instead, the trauma itself seemed to have silenced her. For a woman whose entire identity had been built around extraordinary vocal strength, the silence was almost impossible to understand. Eventually, the voice returned. Not overnight, not dramatically, slowly. She stepped back onto the stage because singing was the one place where grief could not completely defeat her. Audiences often noticed that something had changed. The performances were still magnificent. The gowns were still dazzling. The applause remained thunderous. But there was a different weight behind the songs. The woman who had once filled theaters with pure confidence now carried experiences that could never be left backstage. Perhaps that is why later performances of songs like I Am What I Am resonated so deeply. They no longer sounded like declarations of glamour alone. They sounded like survival. Shirley Bassey continued collecting standing ovations around the world. Yet every curtain call ended the same way. She returned home without Samantha. It became the quiet sorrow that accompanied one of the most recognizable voices of the 20th century, even as audiences continued to see only the brilliance beneath the spotlight. There was a time when Shirley Bassey seemed to belong everywhere. Las Vegas, the Royal Albert Hall, Buckingham Palace, the Academy Awards, Royal Variety performances. If there was a stage worthy of a legend, chances were Shirley Bassey had already stood on it. But something changed as the years passed. Not because the invitations stopped arriving, because she no longer felt the need to accept every one of them. Unlike many performers who struggle to leave the spotlight behind, Shirley slowly reshaped her life on her own terms. By the 1980s, she had already described herself as being in a kind of semi-retirement. She continued giving carefully selected concerts and supporting charitable causes, but the exhausting cycle of constant touring gradually became part of her past. That decision surprised some fans. For decades, they had associated Shirley with grandeur. Every entrance felt theatrical. Every concert seemed larger than life. Yet, away from television cameras, she had discovered something she valued even more: peace. For many years, she made Monaco her home. It offered privacy that would have been impossible during her busiest decades in London or New York. Friends often described her daily routine as surprisingly ordinary. Family visits, quiet meals, walks, reading, time away from photographers. The woman who once filled arenas now enjoyed days in which nothing remarkable happened at all. She never completely disappeared, however. When an occasion truly mattered, Shirley still knew how to remind audiences why she had become one of Britain's greatest entertainers. In 2012, during the celebrations marking 50 years of James Bond films, she performed Goldfinger at the Academy Awards. The audience rose to its feet before she had even finished the final note. More than 40 years after first recording the song, her connection with Bond remained as powerful as ever. Then, in 2020, something remarkable happened again. At 83 years old, Shirley released I Owe It All to You. The album entered the UK Top 40 and quietly made history. She became the first female artist ever to place a Top 40 album in 7 consecutive decades. Few performers, of any generation, have achieved that kind of longevity. It wasn't driven by streaming trends or viral videos. It happened because several generations of listeners were still willing to hear Shirley Bassey sing. Around the same period, she began speaking more openly about gratitude than ambition. Awards no longer seemed important. Sales figures no longer mattered. Legacy had replaced competition. Perhaps nothing illustrated that change more clearly than her decision in 2024 to part with one of the most personal collections she had ever assembled. For decades, Shirley had been known for her love of jewelry, especially diamonds. The connection was almost inseparable from her public image after Diamonds Are Forever. Many of the pieces had accompanied her through royal performances, international tours, and unforgettable moments in her career. Instead of locking them away forever, she chose to let them go. More than 80 carefully selected pieces were offered through Sotheby's in Paris, with proceeds benefiting charities she supported. Among them were gifts from close friends, including a diamond ring presented by Sir Elton John, along with necklaces, watches, and jewels that had marked milestones throughout her extraordinary life. Shirley explained that every piece carried its own story, but she believed it was time for those stories to continue with someone else. The auction exceeded expectations. Collectors from around the world competed for items that represented not only remarkable craftsmanship, but also a lifetime of memories. The collection ultimately realized around $2 million, and even her simple Cartier watch achieved a world record auction price for its model. There was something deeply symbolic about that moment. The woman who had once sung that diamonds last forever was proving that memories do not live inside gemstones. They live inside people. By then, Shirley Bassey no longer needed expensive jewelry, standing ovations, or packed theaters to remind herself who she was. She already knew. And as she approached her 90th birthday, another chapter was quietly unfolding, one that would reveal the remarkable grace with which she had learned to grow older in front of a world that still remembered the girl in the golden dress. There is something fascinating about the way memory works. For many people, Shirley Bassey never really aged. She still exists in a shimmering gold gown, standing beneath bright stage lights, her arms stretched wide as the orchestra reaches its final crescendo. She is forever introducing James Bond, forever commanding sold-out theaters, forever singing with a voice that seemed too powerful to belong to a single person. That is how millions remember her. Reality, of course, is gentler. Today, Shirley Bassey is 89 years old. She no longer spends most of her evenings beneath spotlights. Instead, she lives a quieter life, making only occasional public appearances and choosing carefully when and where she wants to be seen. The pace that once took her around the world has slowed, not because she lost her passion for music, but because she no longer has anything left to prove. Earlier this year, she reminded her admirers that even legends grow older. After announcing that she would undergo surgery on her hand, Shirley explained that something many fans had taken for granted for decades would have to come to an end. She would no longer be able to answer the countless letters arriving from around the world or sign photographs, vinyl records, and personal keepsakes sent through the mail. It was not a decision she made lightly. She had always enjoyed reading those letters, collecting stamps from different countries, and learning how her songs had become part of people's lives. But the pain in her hand had simply become too great. Then came a photograph that quietly delighted her fans. Shirley was sitting in a well-known restaurant in Madrid, smiling beside a chair bearing her name. Her right hand remained bandaged after surgery. Her silver hair framed her face naturally. She wore dark glasses, looked relaxed, and, most importantly, looked happy. She even laughed about her recovery. Writing was still difficult, she admitted, and eating with her left hand had become an unexpected challenge. With perfect timing, she added that Perhaps it was helping her diet after all. That brief joke sounded unmistakably like Shirley Bassey, elegant, warm, and unwilling to let discomfort define her. The years have certainly changed her appearance. The dramatic gowns appear less often. The stage makeup is gone. The face that once looked almost untouched beneath television lights now carries the gentle lines of nearly 9 decades. And yet, something important remains exactly the same. Her posture, her smile, the unmistakable confidence that audiences first noticed all those years ago. Unlike many public figures who spent years trying to outrun time, Shirley has never attempted to convince the world that she is still 40. She has allowed herself to grow older naturally, and there is a quiet dignity in that choice. Perhaps that is why so many people continue to admire her. Not simply because she sold millions of records, not because she became Dame Shirley Bassey, not even because she recorded 3 unforgettable James Bond themes. They admire her because she survived everything that life placed in front of her. She survived poverty. She survived prejudice. She survived public scrutiny. She survived heartbreaking personal loss. And somehow, through all of it, she never lost the voice that made people stop what they were doing and listen. For more than 70 years, that voice traveled across continents. It filled concert halls. It echoed through movie theaters. It became part of weddings, family gatherings, long car rides, and quiet evenings at home. Entire generations grew older, with Shirley Bassey singing in the background. That may be the greatest achievement of all. Awards eventually gather dust. New records replace old ones. Fashion changes. Even the brightest stage lights are switched off. But memories have a remarkable way of staying alive. Today, when people hear the opening brass of Goldfinger or the elegance of Diamonds Are Forever, they are not simply remembering a song. They are remembering a moment in their own lives, and that is something very few artists ever accomplish. At 89, Shirley Bassey may no longer stand beneath the spotlight every night. She doesn't have to. Her legacy has already done what every performer dreams of doing. It outlived the applause. If Shirley Bassey's music has ever been part of your life, I'd love to know which song brings back the strongest memories for you. Was it Goldfinger? Diamonds Are Forever? Big Spender? Or another favorite? Share it in the comments. And if you enjoy celebrating the remarkable lives of legendary entertainers, don't forget to subscribe. There are many more unforgettable stories still waiting to be told.